You may be familiar with that term, and if so, you know what we're going to be talking about. Otherwise, I'll explain in just a little bit. The second one is that we're going to learn how Americans on the home front adapted new civic responsibilities and sacrifices to help the Allied troops during World War II. Every aspect of American life was refocused towards the goal of winning the war during World War II, and everyone tried to do their part to support the Allied troops. Okay, today we're going to be exploring through the topics of victory gardens, rationing, and recycling programs that were a way for those on the home front to help with the war effort. All right, what is a primary source? Does anybody out there want to chime in and show us what you've learned in your classroom? What's a primary source? Maybe look at the screen and get a hint. All right, well, we'll warm up because I really would think it'd be more fun to have some interactions. Oh, did somebody respond?
Yes, Will says it's a first-hand source.
Excellent, excellent. It's a primary source. It's evidence from the past, and they vary widely from objects like photographs that you see in the image, artifacts, autobiographies, maps, movies, newspapers, and letters. The key is that they were created during the time period being studied. And since we're talking about World War II, 1942 to 45, somewhere in that range. The Eisenhower Presidential Library, Museum, and Boyhood Home are full of primary sources. We hope that you can come visit us sometime. All right, now most of the time we learn from secondary sources like textbooks, teachers, websites, which are the result of someone else learning about a topic and then sharing with us. Those can be great tools from which to learn. But when you learn from primary sources, you actually get to hold a real piece of history in your hands and come to your own conclusions. Now let's talk about World War II. We've got a map of the world there, and during the World War II, almost every country was affected, either through actual fighting taking place on their soil, or they were affected by the supply and demand of products that could no longer be distributed from especially places like Japan and China. So where were the soldiers fighting? If you look on the left side of the map, you can see in the yellowy color that was an area under German control, under Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And we call that the European front, even though it has a little bit of Africa in there. In the center, you can see the orange area where Asia is, and that was under Japanese control. So Japan and the Philippines and the South Pacific. So we call that the Pacific Theater. And then we've got the box on the right, and that's called the American home front. Now we've got the front in Europe and the front in Asia. So why did we have any fighting taking place on American soil? Who can chime in on that? There was one place where we actually had some fighting, but it wasn't the continental United States. Who remembers how we got into World War II? Yes.
Amy answered Pearl Harbor.
Perfect. That was the battle that drew the United States into World War II. So the rest of the continental United States was not affected with battles, but yet it was still a front. And it was called that because all of the civilians, which would be just the regular citizens, were asked to help support the war effort. And we're going to find out what some of those ways were. So the home front are all the wives, the kids, the moms and dads, all the other people who were not able to go and be soldiers. Everyone helping those on the front line was the way the Americans on the home front could be part of this effort. Now, the shortages began as soon as the United States entered the war in December of 1941. That's because the imports were cut off dramatically as the Axis forces sunk the Allied cargo ships and stopped selling products to the United States, as I said before, like Japan and China. Now, the government needed to get the word out as to how the people could help. But, you know, there was no TV. So we had radio, but visuals seem to trigger excitement in people. So a series of propaganda posters were developed to inform the home front on ways that they could help win the war. So the image that you see there is a primary source. It is a propaganda poster. We're going to see quite a few of those throughout the program. Ships, planes, fuels, and food supplies that would have previously been used to take care of the Americans' needs at home were diverted or switched to war use. There were many American companies who made items for American homes, and they changed to make items needed for the war. In the primary sources you see here, you can see the modern day machines that Maytag makes today, but we're going to see what the original Maytag company did for the war effort. So watch this newsreel. Remember I said there's no TV? So any of these little video clips that we're watching, unless it's a documentary, it was something that people would have seen in the movie theaters, and so they called them newsreels. And I want you to find out about a lady named Holly. And maybe you can tell me a few things that you learned about her.
Maytag was one of the Iowa firms that stopped producing consumer goods and started making war supplies. In 1943, 19-year-old Hollis Pat Harrison from Albion, formerly Hollis Tarbell, had been working for a local dentist taking care of domestic chores. Harrison saw a newspaper advertisement placed by the Maytag company and knew
all the guys were doing something. They were fighting, going to service, enlisting, what have you, that we knew, and we thought it'd be a good idea for us to do something too, while we could, and the money was good.
the company, famous for its clothes washers, started making aircraft parts. Harrison was hired to make exhaust systems for B-26 Marauder bombers. To help finance the creation of war goods, the government began to offer bonds. The investment strategy was not lost on Maytag employees. Together, they purchased a B-26 Marauder for the war effort.
All right, so were you listening? What did Holly do for the war effort? She could be called a Rosie the Riveter. You may have heard that term before, but many women on the home front stepped up to take over the jobs that the men left behind when they went to be soldiers. So Holly was the one who went and helped make parts for the aircrafts, the airplanes, okay? And she worked on the exhaust system. Now, in today's world, we still have companies who are making sacrifices, and in this case, it's for the COVID-19. Companies like Ford, 3M, and GE have halted manufacturing their usual products to make ventilators and respirators to help with the COVID patients. Do we have anybody that called in on that? All right. Okay, this is a rather interesting propaganda poster. Take a look at what the artifact is in the forefront of this poster. You can see in there, there's a pair of scissors, there's a tape measure, maybe some thread. I see a pin cushion. So somebody join in here and tell me, what would that artifact be used for? Okay, we're not having very many participants today. So just jump in when you're ready. Those items would be used for sewing. And to go along with our theme of use it up, wear it out, make it do, that woman is, oh yes, we have somebody chiming in.
Nicole said reusing your clothes and fixing them.
Exactly. So that's what she's doing. Her husband, the gentleman in the picture, is out mowing his lawn and he ripped a hole in the back of his pants. So instead of going in and throwing it away and going and buying a new pair of pants, she's going to patch the hole in his pants. So that's what the civilians needed to do on the home front to allow those other products to go for the soldiers. Okay. During World War II, access to many items were rationed because America was trying to supply huge amounts of food and vital materials to the armed forces. In order to control inflation, President Roosevelt created the Office of Price Administration to try to keep prices low and to provide equal access for everybody, not just the wealthy. listen to this documentary to see what things were rationed and how did the citizens react to having to make these sacrifices.
With war comes great sacrifice. Throughout every community in America, luxuries were set aside and rationing became a way of life.
It became a big part of the routine of the community because we never knew what they were going to want us to do next, what they were going to ration next. So it was difficult, really, because you just took it as it came. You took life in stride as it came, and you accepted it.
Nobody complained about anything, except the kids wanting gasoline to run around a little bit. And everybody did what they had to do with the ration, and it was fine. The United States Ration Board created war ration books to monitor the food and necessities of each family and business throughout the community.
I remember when I went to school where, when I was attending Elk Grove High School, we had to get rations for our shoes, or our clothing, and for gasoline too. And everything you needed, you had to have a ration coupon book. And even to go buy butter and stuff like that. It was a time when I thought it was pretty hard for most people.
But it caused people to ride public transportation together. It caused people to consider what they did in their off hours, what they ate, what they wore. Everything was very closely examined in those days. The luxuries were set aside. And it was something that was a hardship, but it was necessary so that it was accepted. And whether it was the lack of fuel to take a drive in the country, or some type of meat or other food that wouldn't be on the table this week, people accepted that as part of the burden to bear, and that they were all bearing it equally.
All right, so as I was listening, I could name about 6 different things that were rationed. Do we have a brave soul that wants to chime in and name at least a couple of those things that were rationed?
Will says gas.
Gasoline was rationed,
We have gas and food.
Food, specifically, I have a big sweet tooth, so this would have been hard on me. Sugar was the first thing to be rationed, and it was the last thing to still be rationed in 47 after the war. Yes?
Okay, they're coming in. We have shoes.
Yes.
Rubber and
Yes.
metal.
Yes.
Nylon stockings.
Yeah, now this video didn't tell all these things, but yes, obviously you guys have studied this. Okay, some other things?
Clothes and shoes again are mentioned.
Okay, now I know my closet, I have more than 2 pairs of shoes. So think about all of the clothing that you have just for yourself. A whole family during the 40s probably could have put all of their clothing in 1 or 2 closets.
This is another good one. Meat.
Yes. Very, very good. You were listening, and obviously you have some background knowledge too. Very, very good. So how did the citizens react to this? Were they grumbling or complaining, other than the teenagers who wanted to be able to drive more? What was the overall reaction from the people who were speaking? Because it was for the war effort? Yes?
Amy says they didn't complain, but it was hard for them.
That's right. But they knew it was for a greater cause. So they were able to make those sacrifices. Yes?
They understood the hardships, but knew sacrifice was necessary.
Very good. Excellent job. All right, let's move. Oh, got somebody else.
They wanted to help bring their loved ones who were soldiers overseas. They wanted to bring them home.
Exactly. Let's end the war quickly, and we can help do that. Awesome. All right, we're going to talk about a little bit more about the rationing part of this. In your image, you can see both the coupons and then some tokens. Price limits or ceiling prices were set, limiting the price that stores could charge for items. Now, stores could raise the prices above what the price was in March of 1942. Ration books with the coupons in it and tokens were carefully distributed to each person within the family by local boards, and there were over 5,500 boards across the country. These coupons were used when a person went to the store to, along with their money, to buy the rationed items, as we said, sugar, butter, meat, oil, frozen fruits and vegetables. Now, the red tokens that you see there would be used to as change if you purchased meat, and the blue ones were if you were buying processed foods. Now, if you notice, this is a book number 4. Book number 1 would have been the one issued in the early part of the war years, and the first thing that was rationed was sugar. And then they just would issue the different numbers of books depending on what was added to the list of things being rationed. Now, these coupons did not take the place of money, but had to be used in addition to the money. That enabled everybody to have their fair share. So a wealthy person couldn't go to the market and buy all the bags of sugar and all the coffee and hoard it. They had to only buy what they were allowed by the coupon booklets that they had been issued. Now, most citizens received, for gasoline, if you got an A stamp for gasoline, that meant you got 3 to 4 gallons of gas per week. Now think about that. And think about the context of that time. Everybody didn't own their own car. There were very few cars. Some people were still, you know, in the rural areas, were still using horses or mules to pull their buggies and wagons and to get around. So not everybody needed that much gas. If you had a B sticker on your car, you'd get 8 gallons, and that was for people in more industry jobs. C equaled essential jobs such as doctors. There was a T for truckers because they were distributing our goods, and X was pretty much unlimited. That was for clergy, police, firemen, and civil defense workers. Now, you see on there war speed 35 miles per hour. That is just chugging along. You could probably almost ride your bicycle that fast. But research showed that if you went at slower speeds, it made your tires last 4 times longer than if you went a speed of 65 miles per hour. So that was a pretty good way to save on rubber. To supplement many of the food items that were in short supply, victory gardens were planted in many, many unusual places. Backyards, vacant lots, parks, baseball fields, and schoolyards across America. Everyone took part. So let's listen to this primary source interview to see what this man remembers about Victory Garden.
Well, it was just very difficult to transport fruit, vegetables, and everything. And most of it that was raised in California or wherever they were raised was going to the troops. So we had to raise our own and bring it into the local grocery store. So another part of the government effort was they called them victory gardens. In the cities, even in the country, they wanted everybody to have their own garden, raise their own produce, and maybe have enough so that they could, that somebody that didn't have access to a garden have produce, because it wasn't available in stores. It was a great morale thing. And for young people like me, it was, you know, I could do my part. I was a part of the effort.
So he felt good about that. He could do his part. But where was the food going that would normally be manufactured for the citizens? Did someone hear that in the early part of the video? Stores? Well, no, because the store shelves were pretty empty. That's why they were having to ration. So where were they sending this food?
Nicole said the military.
Yes, yes. And we're going to see an image later on of the little food ration packets that the soldiers were provided for. Because when they went into a battlefield, they had to take everything with them that they needed. They were called GI Joes, government issue Joe. And so they didn't get to stop at a McDonald's or at a Casey's or something and pick up something to eat. All of those things had to be sent. And so that's part of why the victory gardens were so necessary. Now, they were a way for civilians, the non-military people, to ensure an adequate food supply during World War II. So this rationing process helped everybody to stay healthy. Now, if you look at images from that time period, everybody's pretty slim. You know, they didn't oversize or supersize themselves just yet. And they seem to eat a little bit healthier than maybe we do today. Let's take a look at the images that we have here of these artifacts, primary source photos, and see if you can help me figure out where are these people gardening. Let's look at number 1. Take a look at the background images. These are old-fashioned mobile homes. So what's going on in that picture? Can somebody chime in? What's your interpretation of picture number 1?
Marcus says it looks like they're like in a trailer community.
Yes. And so he just took a little bit of extra space beside his mobile home or his trailer and is making himself a garden. It's not a very big one, so he may not be planning on feeding very many people. But look at number 2 in contrast. Look at the background there. What do you see in the background? Can you identify whether it's a city or a country or?
Sloth and Amy both say it's a city.
Right.
I can tell because of the buildings.
Excellent. And they must be planning on building a pretty big garden because they're using a horse or mule. I can't tell which one that is. And so it's probably just a vacant lot within the community. And they're probably, I bet they all want to team together on that one. Now, how about number 3? This is not seen very often. What do you think the story is behind that image, that picture?
Courtney identified the garden as it's at a home. And again, Marcus says gardening in the yard.
Right. And just an individual, it looks like he's got a green thumb. He's got a pretty good garden going on there. Now, during 1943, there were 20 million victory gardens that were planted. And those gardens produced more than 1/3 of all vegetables grown that year. So I would say that the home front did a pretty good job of stepping up. Now, the Eisenhower Foundation Victory Garden Project was done in the spring of 2020. We were in quarantine and we couldn't have the kids come down to our campus anymore. So we provided buckets, gardening buckets that had tools and seeds and some small plants, some potting soil, so that the kids could plant their very own victory garden and put one of the signs that you see. Now, we didn't want to just dump the stuff on the kids, so we also provided lessons on how to plant your garden, how to enrich the soil with compost, how to water your garden. All of those things were necessary to be successful in growing something that you could actually eat. Do we have any gardeners in the audience? How many of you planted a garden this summer?
Amy planted one.
Good.
Looks like we have several. Sloth planted one with his dad, Will, Marcus.
Good.
We have quite the gardening crew here.
Are any of our listeners in Abilene that maybe they actually used the products from the foundation?
Nicole shared most of their class in Idaho.
Oh, wow, that's exciting. That's exciting. Well, very good. Well, during the summer, man, you can just eat all those vegetables. I wonder what the most popular thing was that you planted in your garden. Can we chime in and see maybe what the number 1 thing was? I'm betting it starts with a T.
Rebecca said that she plants flowers, but we have lots of tomatoes and basil.
Okay.
Sweet corn.
Excellent. Good. So during the summer, you can fill yourself up on all those foods, but then you want to be able to preserve those foods so that you can eat them in the wintertime when the garden's not growing. Because I know here in Kansas, our gardening season is pretty much over now. So what are some ways that you can preserve that food so you can still be eating healthy foods in the wintertime? Chime in. What can you do with the extra produce? Yes?
Salem says that you can freeze and can. You
Very
can also
good.
dry it.
There, very good. So maybe you've got a dehydrator, or in the 40s, their refrigerators were very, very small. So they maybe could freeze small amounts. But many of our homes now have just chest freezers or just a freezer by itself. So that would be more. But many people did the canning, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, wartime cookbooks and pamphlets were used to show Americans how to substitute a rationed item for another non-rationed ingredient. For example, I said sugar was the first thing to be rationed, and man, I like my muffins and cookies and things. So you can substitute the sugar with honey or syrup or applesauce. So there's other things that are sweet. And so these recipe booklets taught the housewives how to use those substitutes. It also told them how that they could stretch the amount of food. Meat was one of the things that was rationed. And so maybe you'd go in and you'd buy a nice roast beef and you'd cook it that first night, and everyone would get their deck of card size piece of meat. And then the next night, maybe you'd make another selection of that with maybe hash with potatoes and onions. And then maybe the third meal you could make out of a mixed stew or beef and noodles. So instead of eating it all the first night, suggested how to stretch it to make it into several different meals. Now, these propaganda posters are pretty powerful. This was one of my aha moments when I first learned about this program. The first one says, housewives, save waste fats for explosives. And then save waste fats for explosives, take them to your meat dealer. The housewives, and I say that because the culture of the 40s was that the women stayed at home and they were the cleaners and cookers and the mothers, and the men were the ones that left the home to be the breadwinners. So the women were encouraged to use that oil in place of butter or the cooking oil that you'd buy at the stores. But then they were asked to save that grease or lard, and that's the renderings that you get after you cook bacon or hamburger or any of those kinds of meat. When that can was full, you would take that to the butcher at the meat market, who would send it to a rendering plant to be processed into munitions, bombs and bullets. So how strong are those images? That housewife is pouring that grease right down into a cannon. And then the second poster, she's pouring it right into an explosion that the bombs are going everywhere. So those housewives could say, here you go, honey, I'm saving this grease to make you some bombs so you can go defeat Hitler. So that was a very powerful message to the people on the home front.
Schools and community groups held scrap metal drives and contests. Schools at War Program, Boy and Girl Scouts, cars were also not made from February 1942 to late 1945. And even the American penny was made from steel in order to send more copper to the war effort. This newsreel shows how much metal was recycled.
America, land of abundance, learns to mobilize its waste, to save its scrap, to provide more metals for war. Tin cans, collected in one citywide salvage drive, total more than 1 million pounds. A 55-carload contribution to the United Nations war effort. When processed, will provide 11,000 pounds of pure tin, thousands of pounds of copper, both vital metals in the production of armament.
Fuel and rubber were also in high demand for the military, and our supplies from places like Japan and China had been cut off. Therefore, the Americans were expected to drive less, drive slower, and carpool. Driving 35 instead of 65 made tires last 4 times longer. So why don't we go ahead and analyze these two primary source posters? Let's start with the one that has yellow and blue, and it reads, hi ho, it's off to work we go. Help win the war and squeeze one more. So right here, it looks as if you have, who knows how many people are squeezed into that little car, and they're all heading off to work happily. Even though they might be uncomfortable, it's worth the sacrifice for them to be in one vehicle and share the gas and the wear and tear on the tires. So this is an upbeat poster. When we look at the other poster, we can see that it says, when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Join a car sharing club today. They're both focusing on sharing the car, but this one is definitely has a more serious impact because no one wanted to be associated with Adolf Hitler on the home front. So both posters are encouraging to car share. Paper was in short supply, but in high demand during the war. The Federal War Production Board estimated that 30,000 tons of paperboard were needed mostly just to pack artillery shells. Paper was also needed for the cartons used to ship K-rations, milk, and even blood plasma to soldiers. Let's look at these two photographs. the one in the bottom right-hand corner, these are going to be K rations. Soldiers would receive breakfast, lunch, and dinner in these K rations, and they were made out of paper. So a lot of paper was used for all of their meals. And then this photograph is a really neat primary source. I want you to take a minute to see if you can decipher what the Navy man is holding, what it reads. It says American Red Cross dried human blood plasma for United States Navy. So again, the blood plasma was an important part of the war effort, and so it needed to be shipped over, and again, paper was definitely in high need. So we're going to explore our 3D artifact gallery to see what these primary sources can tell us about life on the home front during World War II, and how everyone truly made a sacrifice during this time. So when analyzing any artifact, it's important to ask questions and to really use your looking eyes and observe. So although I might not ask these questions for every artifact, I want you to keep them in mind. First, what is it made out of? Oftentimes it might be helpful to see what it's made out of. You might know the location. It's going to give you a hint or a clue. What is the artifact's purpose? What does it tell us about the time period? And who do you think this artifact belonged to? So in our 3D gallery, what I'll do is I'll take the mouse and I'll slowly spin it around. And as I'm spinning around the artifact, it's not the same as holding it in your hands, but it's pretty close. I want you to see if you can read. You read the words, if anything pops out to you. The colors that are used, the red, white, and blue, very patriotic. The eagle on the front. And it says that this is a U.S. war ration books. What do you think the purpose was? Right, from our presentation today, you know that the purpose was to take these to the store so you can take the coupons out and you can get your sugar, your coffee, your nylons, things that really needed to be, that were in high demand, but we wanted to make sure that those went overseas to our troops on the war front. So we had a ration here at home. And then again, the time period would reflect World War II. And it belonged to someone on the home front here in America. These two artifacts go right along with the ration books. This one here I'm spinning. Let's see what we can read. And what is inside of that leather pouch? Yes, you'll see a ration booklet along for a pouch for tokens to be kept. Now we mentioned earlier that gas was rationed, and if you had a letter in your windshield, that letter would represent how much gas you would receive. Most people, the average citizen, would receive an A, a gasoline ration, and this A would be placed so the gas attendant could see that you're only going to receive 3 gallons of gas. Other people might have different letters based on their occupation. And then you would also have coupons, just like for sugar or coffee, and you would have your booklet to keep those in. So gas, fuel is going to be very important, as well as the food ration booklets. Now, cucumber seeds and corn seeds are going to be a few of the items that will be used once open to plant those victory gardens, and then eventually can. And so when we look at these seeds, if any of you had your victory gardens this year, do these seed packets look similar to today? Yeah, not a whole lot has changed. These were these were packaged in Independence, Missouri. For any of my Midwest people, that's fairly close. And then this is interesting. It says grow for good health. So even though food was being rationed here and throughout much of the world, people were still concerned about a good balanced diet with fruits and vegetables. Now, once winter came, we couldn't just go out to the garden and eat fresh vegetables, so they needed to be canned. And so this is a time appropriate canning jar. Can anyone read the words across the front? It says ball and then mason. What's it made out of? Glass, yes. So, you know, even today we preserve things with glass, but we also use tin. But at that time, where was that tin, that metal being used? It's going to be over on the war front. So we still have ball mason jars today. They're going to look slightly different, but not much. And then these guys over here, what can you hypothesize? What do you think they are? They are made out of a metal. They're going to be the tongs. When you can food, you can't just put it in the glass and put the lid on. It's not going to preserve it for very long. If you're going to eat it right away, that's fine. But it's going to go into a very hot water bath, and the steam is actually going to seal it. And so those jars will be very, very hot, so they need the tongs to lift them up safely and let them cool. So I would assume that, I would hypothesize that these artifacts would belong to someone in a kitchen, probably a housewife. So this was one of my favorite artifacts we have. I'm just going to spin it around and I want you to observe. Look for any markings. You can tell that it's made out of an aluminum or a tin. And what do you think its purpose is based on the word you read across the front of it? It's going to hold grease. Not grease from the garage, but grease from the kitchen. This is where the moms and the sisters and the grandmas, when they were cooking, they would take the grease fat from bacon or ground beef, and they would pour it into this grease container and put the lid on. When it would get full, they would take it down to the butcher, and he would then take it to a rendering plant, and it would get turned into glycerin, and which is going to be explosives for ammunition and for bombs. So I love this artifact, although it's just a container, you know, but when you dive more into it and you ask those questions of what was its purpose? Its purpose was to help create munitions on the home front to help win against the Axis powers in World War II, which it's such a powerful artifact when you think about it. I'm going to zoom in on this photo. I want you to take a minute just to look at all of the variables here. Look at who is in this photo. What are they standing on? And can you read anything from this photo? I love this photo because it's children, okay? I bet some of them are similar in age to you. And the purpose of this photo was to represent that anyone from any age could sacrifice on the home front to help win the war and help bring home our soldiers. And so these kids collected metal, and what that sign said was iron pills for Hitler. So they were collecting this metal, and it would get turned into munitions to take out Adolf Hitler. And they were very proud of that. So again, it just shows as a nation what we did to sacrifice. Not only metal was in need and grease, but also paper. And so this magazine, I'm going to turn it around real slow. These are going to be Boy Scouts, and they're going to be collecting paper. Paper was in much need, And so there was a medal that could be earned for collecting a certain amount of paper. And this artifact's just neat. You can even see the advertisements of Baby Ruth candy on the back. But the medal that was going to be earned was General Eisenhower's face on the front. Let's see if we can spin it around to read the words on it. Can you get a glimpse? War Service, 1945. So this is going to represent, even though these Boy Scouts couldn't go over and fight on the war front, they were still receiving a medal that represented their participation in the war by collecting these tens of thousands of pounds of paper to be put into the war effort. And here's a great photo of General Eisenhower with a Boy Scout troop, and this troop collected thousands and thousands of pounds of paper to help in the war effort, and they earned the medal. And it truly tells a story again of you have the general, you have General Eisenhower, who commanded hundreds of thousands of troops in the European front, and here you have a couple dozen boys on the home front that sacrificed and did everything they could to help. So overall, what we can tell is that the entire home front, the American people from young to old, they did everything they could to help win the war and bring our troops home from overseas.